All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Think Books Presents Online. Larry I. Palmer, and for his book, Scholarship Boy, in conversation with Joel Goldstein. Sorry, my computer with my introduction fell asleep for a little bit. So I'm very happy that you are joining us tonight. Left Think Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Larry and Joel, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation, and we have curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. You can shop online or over the phone, however it can be easiest for you. We are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and make the world a better place, and we think that this is a perfect event for that. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual, but we do ask that you help us continue to do that by supporting Left Bank Books. So we do have copies of Larry's book available for sale right here at left-bank.com. You can support Larry by purchasing a copy from Left Bank Books, and that helps us to not only continue producing events like this, but it also helps us to keep our bookstore and our staff here and in St. Louis through these most unusual of times. So thank you all so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I am the events host for Left Bank Books, the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience, so be sure to type those up as a comment, and you can ask Larry or Joel even a question in the comments, and we'll get to those at the end of the event. And you can follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. In 1958, 14-year-old Larry Palmer left his parents and 9 siblings at home in St. Louis and boarded a train to attend Phillips Exeter Academy, then an all-boys school, on full scholarship. In Scholarship Boy, Palmer reflects on his experiences as a young Black boy growing up far from home, learning to fit into a white world without becoming estranged from his closely knit family. Palmer delves back into the early years of his childhood and at times all the way to his family's past in rural Arkansas before he was born, and brings the reader up to his undergraduate years at Harvard and his father's death while he attended Yale Law School in the 1960s. The 9th of 10 children, he writes about the delicate, complex balances within the family and illustrates the ways his sibling relationships shaped him as he was also being molded by his elite education. Palmer's journey from being the next to the baby of his family into adulthood reveals the personal and often hidden costs of cultural migration. And John Irving says, "My friendship with Larry has been among the most enduring of my Exeter friendships. But before I read his memoir of social and racial dislocation, I never knew the story that unfolded in the home Larry left when he came to Exeter. Larry's remarkable family story gives me a deeper appreciation of someone I met as a teenager and have known all my life. As a teammate and a friend, I always loved Larry. Now I understand him more." Larry I. Palmer is professor of law emeritus at Cornell University, where he spent 27 years as a teacher, scholar, and vice president. He grew up in St. Louis in the 1940s and 50s. He holds degrees from Harvard University and Yale Law School. He is the author of 2 scholarly works, Law, Medicine, and Social Justice, and Endings and Beginnings. Since 2015, his essays have appeared in New England Review and VCU Blackbird and have been cited as notable essays in Best American Essays. He lives in Richmond, Virginia. And tonight, Larry will be in conversation with Joel K. Goldstein. Joel is the Vincent C. Imel Professor of Law Emeritus at St. Louis University School of Law, where he was a member of the full-time faculty from 1994 to 2019. He has written widely on the presidency, vice presidency, and constitutional law. He is best known for his writings on the vice presidency, including the White House vice presidency, The Path to Significance, Mondale to Biden, which came out in 2016, a topic national and international media frequently interview him about. And now, without further ado, I am so happy and proud to be able to welcome Larry I. Palmer and Joel K. Goldstein for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please give them a hearty round of applause. And there we go.
Great. Great. Well, Shane, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. It's a great privilege to have this chance for me to talk to Larry Palmer about this wonderful book that he's written and that I've so enjoyed. And it really very much a book about self-discovery and about family and race and so much else. And Larry, one of the things that is intriguing to me is that as Shane gave both of our biographies a bit, and we're both guilty of being law professors. You're extremely successful, really a senior administrator at one of the great universities in America, Cornell University, vice president, and a academic who wrote about law and bioethics. And the thing that's intriguing, or one of the things that's so intriguing to me, is how did you happen to write this book, which is really so different than what guys like us normally write about as legal professionals?
Well, I think that's a complex story, really, of how I developed as a writer. I think I first came up with this idea many, many years ago when, before my baby boy was born. He's 38. I've started to notice I was remembering things I thought I had forgotten. It's like archaeology. There are little pieces of stuff I was remembering. But I think what finally got me to sit down and devote myself to writing this, after I'd done a few essays, written a few op-eds about like bioethical issues, or even some essays about writing law, that I thought there was a story here that might help people to understand two things: an unusual family structure at a time when our basic family structure is changing. As David Brooks wrote in The Atlantic recently, the nuclear family was a mistake. I mean, I think that's what the title of his article was. But also on race, I thought it was unusual. The unusual story of how I got to Exeter is important because I wasn't, in my view, I was not the exceptional student in my family. I was just one of the very able students in this unusual family. So over time, I started talking about my life, but it took me a long time to sit down in 2011 and just say, I'm going to try to write this book, and then to learn how to present a story. And fortunately, I got disabused of the notion that you could write this great man biography very quickly in the first workshop I went to, when the instructor said, you got to get that boy on the train. There's a story there. And that's how I got started.
And of course, the boy on the train is when you get on the train at Union Station and you, never having been, 15 miles east of St. Louis, and you take a train to Cleveland and then ultimately on to Exeter. But you mentioned that that one of the inspirations is the sort of the extraordinary family that you came from. And in reading the book, I mean, you have portraits of your 9 siblings, your parents, and more than we can talk about this evening. But I found that some of the portraits of your siblings were just so compelling, and I felt that I really wish I had the chance to know some of them, and particularly your older sister Lena, and your brother Al, and Leela were 3 of those that I thought were just really wonderful portraits. Would you say a bit about them?
Gladly. 3 of my favorite people in the world. the wonderful thing about once I got into writing the book, I realized you can't write a book like this, a memoir or essays, in a linear fashion, the way you would write one of your brilliant articles. You've got to find the story, build the story, and yet build it in facts. And what I found that in each of them played such an important role in my life. My sister Lena, the oldest one's children are about my age. And so they're actually, if you think of it kind of sociologically rather than biologically, there are 5 of us about the same. I'm the oldest of a group of 5 kids because especially during the summers, we're well integrated. But she lived close enough for me to walk to her house once I was about 9 or 10 years old, less than a mile. And every time I walked into that house, it was like walking into this incredibly warm and friendly and gracious person. And it remained that way, I think, almost to the day she died, just a couple of years ago. She lived to be 93 years old. And she's just an incredibly loving and inspirational person. My sisters, I guess it's important to realize that I had an all-male education, if you read the book, from the time I was in the 6th grade until I went to law school. My 3rd year in law school, I had a female teacher. I did have one section person in a philosophy course when I was in college at Harvard. But so I find it interesting that these women in my life before I went to Exeter are very important to me. But my second oldest sister, Leela, happened to finish nursing school and go to LA a year before I went to Exeter. So we both sort of left the family about the same time, but she happens to be there. And then I realized that growing up, she's the one who discovers I can read before I go to school when I'm 4. She, of course, the chapter, I'll give it away, Dancing with My Sister, it's just something that makes you, at least makes me as a writer and just as a reader, happy. It's just such a wonderful way in which she's teaching me about, frankly, how to be a man, how to appreciate music, eternal, it's sort of inside of yourself. Wonderful. My brother Al is just one of those extraordinary human beings that, he's my brother, but I think he exudes so much strength and grace and compassion, all the very fine qualities. And so I always admired him. He teaches me basketball. He teaches me customer service. He had a snow cone business in addition to his job, and he would take me in and let me work with him on that. And he's so he's a great listener, but he's a very strong person, and he doesn't try to make me into him. He's always interested in what I can do, be it how to catch a ball or how to shoot a basket or how to deal with girls.
When you first had the opportunity to go to Exeter when you were 14, how did that come about, and what role did Al play in that?
Well, when the schools were desegregated in St. Louis, the elementary schools, 1955, there was a gifted and talented program, which I was selected for. And there was a teacher there, George Hiram, who heard about Exeter and their scholarship program and encouraged my parents to let me apply. Surprisingly, but not surprisingly, looking back on my dad, my father was opposed to this idea, opposed to my leaving the family to go to this boarding school, and sort of resisted the idea at first. And after the principal had come to St. Louis for an alumni affair, after I'd been introduced to the director, there's a person called the Director of Scholarship Boys at Exeter. Exeter is an interesting boarding school because they've had a scholarship program since they were founded in 1781. Also, and his job was to find, as he called, kids who were long on brains but short on cash. And he went around the country white kids, black kids, farm kids. Exeter was a relatively diverse school in terms of geography. When I was there, I think there were 42 states represented in
Wow.
the school. But so my dad, the first meeting went so well that the director, Hammy Bissell of Scholarship Boys, wanted us to meet the principal, who was coming from an alumni. So he comes to meet my parents, and my dad refuses to take off work, but Al decides to go in his place. And he makes up a nice excuse for Dad's not being there. But he also kind of cross-examines the principal, William Gurdon Saltonstall, about what it would be like for a small kid, how many other black kids were there, what's the school doing to recruit more. All these things were just sort of said. I was very impressed that he was able to, to stand up for me and kind of get a reassurance, like two men talking about someone they both care about. And it gave me a lot of confidence that my elder brother, Willie, was also in favor of my going, but I had a lot of confidence that the adults would work this out. And I just sort of withdrew from the battle. I don't know exactly what happened that convinced my dad eventually to let me go. But once I was there, he was extremely happy.
And one of the things that struck me about your older siblings and Lena and Al was really how nurturing they were and how supportive they were about. You talked about Lena sort of letting you win at Chinese checkers, and Al always sort of building you up a bit.
Yeah, my sister Lena. Our houses were sort of intermixed. We might go over there, and I can remember, and we have the only sleepovers we'd ever had would be at my older siblings and their kids. So we might spend the night at Lena's, and then we have breakfast. And I can remember trying to make pancakes for the first time at Lena's, and I really messed it up. And her kids will razz me about that, whatever. But somehow she always gave me confidence. You'll learn. You can try again. It was always that. My mother tended to be much more of a perfectionist and say, you didn't do X, you didn't do Y. This is why these pancakes are soggy. But they were both very, very nurturing and accepting of my quirks. And, the idea of anyone picking on me physically or emotionally, the older kids were never that way to me. And fortunately, when I first started school was like that. No one ever touched me. I mean, it's like I had this protective bubble around me. At least I felt that every time I went any place.
And you dedicate the book to your siblings.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, for two reasons. At a second workshop I was at, or at the very first workshop, the instructor asked a very interesting question. She said, if the writing gods told you only had 10 more pages you could write, and that was it, what would those 10 pages be about? And I said, I would write a 1-page meditation or prayer for each of my siblings, including the one who died before I was born. And someone in the class, the assistant instructors, that make a great structure. So I built the structure out of my individual relationships with these siblings. Not everything I wrote hundreds of pages. I think I had to stop for about 2.5 years and just sort of write until I see how this sibling fits into what I call the Exeter story or my coming of age. And almost all of them are there. There's not much about my brother Mac. There was, but he got cut on the publisher's floor. There was a little scene about him. But so that was sort of the emotional river, figuring out, sort of deconstructing, to use the sort of modern literary term, the notion of the family into these individual relationships was a very important aspect of the writing. And it was the inspiration of keeping me digging when I couldn't quite figure out things, filling in things very carefully to kind of present the human relationships, these multiple human relationships that were helping to shape me and also preparing me emotionally to be away from home in a very strange way.
In the title, Scholarship Boy: Meditations on Family and Race, race is also a major concept or issue that's discussed in the book. And one of the things that you're, of course, growing up in St. Louis in the 1950s and early 1960s during the summers, at least, and you're growing up about less than a mile from where Left Bank Books is located,
Yeah.
On 4956 Maple Avenue, one of the things that struck me is that you and I were both growing up in St. Louis at about the same time. I was growing up less than 5 miles away in the Flint Park area in University City, and yet I think our experiences and in what we encountered in the 50s and even the early 1960s was very different in St. Louis. And I'd be interested in you reflecting on race in St. Louis as you encountered it as a child then, or a young adult.
Well, the way I would describe it, or have described it in my mind, I wrote a little essay called Checkerboard Segregation. Remember, my parents migrated from Arkansas a few months before I was born in 1944. So I felt like there were things closed and things open, but they had to kind of navigate this semi-segregated world. I'll just take our street that we lived on, Maple Avenue, to the west of us was an apartment building where there was a little white boy, Rocky. In the summertime in '53, we all played together. There was also next door 2 other black kids, but Rocky went to Clark, which is up near Sodan High School, which is west. The kids next door went to the Catholic school because they had been desegregated in the 40s. And we went to St. Louis. So even as a child, I could see this. I used to think every time you go shopping downtown, you have lunch out. Well, that's because the restaurants downtown would serve blacks. The restaurants in our neighborhood would not. There was a Howard Johnson up near Natural Bridge, which we couldn't do. And I think my parents and my siblings didn't want that affront to happen to us. So they kept kind of creating opportunities to get around where there were barriers. But I think that was an important part of it, that things were opening up. I think most people don't know that St. Louis had, I think, sit-ins before Nashville or Greensboro. That in '61, there was a city ordinance on public accommodations. That's because of people like Charlie Odom, who was president of the National Corps, who was, of course, married to my kindergarten teacher, Miss O'Fallon. And my mother was very active in civic and politics and so forth. So a restaurant, the Footlong, decides to hire blacks. My first year after Exeter, I got a job there. And previously, we could not sit down in that restaurant. So it was much more of a opening doors, someone opening doors. My brother went to Sodan High School, which I think some of your relatives went to, but that was actually a fairly welcoming community. They embraced the black kids from Sumner High School who came in, at least the parents did. I always say, living in Virginia, the biggest problem with massive resistance, in my view, in Virginia was the parents failed their job. They didn't say, we've got to deal with this. How can we help our kids? They spent all their time either joining resistance or, abandoning the public schools and eventually closing them in some parts of the state for 4 years. So it was quite an experience. It was like, if you read the preface, I had racial consciousness, but not racial fear, would be the way I would describe the way in which things happen. The movie theaters, we had to figure out which ones we could go to, which ones we couldn't.
And there were some, I guess, that would have a matinee on Saturday that would be open to African Americans, or
Yeah, the Fox Theater would occasionally, sometimes I would see Leela and my older brother Mac. They would say, well, we can go see this Lena Horne movie at the Fox on this Saturday. And they would get on the bus and go down to the Fox Theater on Grand Avenue.
and the restaurants where you'd be served takeout, but not.
Yeah, and it varied. Downtown, the department stores, I think, were the first ones to open up, but they also were the first ones to hire blocks. When they were doing the demonstration, it was two goals: get the right to be there, but also the right to work there. So we knew you had to know where. It was almost like the green book of restaurants. That is, you had to know which restaurants were open, unless you wanted to go and get refused.
And so Shane in his introduction mentioned the idea of the costs of cultural migration.
Yeah.
Once you go to Exeter, you're really in a situation where you're living in two very different worlds.
Yes.
How can you say a bit about that, and how did you navigate that?
Well, I think I navigated it quite slowly. I think that's one thing about my memoir growing up. You're trying different things. Like I try not talking about what's going on in Exeter, at least not enthusiastically, except to my sister Leela, who happens to be visiting. I think I wanted, especially at Exeter, I wanted to try a lot of new things. Like I quit the wrestling team. Wrestling was new to me. Sports, organized sports. No, not quite. We had done some softball, but wrestling was new to me. But I quit to try hockey, thinking this would be something. And I realized you skate okay, but you really are not going to keep up with these New England kids who've been skating since they were 2. So I go back to wrestling. I think the way I threw myself, I think what I would say is I grew up in this incredibly tight-knit family, so I'm very joined to that family. When I went to Exeter, I tended to throw myself into new experiences to see what they were like, be it photography or sometimes even music. But then sometimes you see sort of a blending. When a very famous French music teacher, Nathalie Boulanger, came to Exeter to conduct our glee club of a girls' school, I'd go to the dress rehearsal. I mean, she was the first woman to conduct the Boston Symphony Orchestra and so forth. But after that, a group of kids who were in the jazz program says, well, if we hear this great classical music, why can't we have American music jazz? They went to the principal and says, I don't know who did this, but this is Exeter. I think the Modern Jazz Quartet would be great to have Exeter. So they brought the Modern Jazz Quartet, came in May of 1962. It was just absolutely fabulous to hear, these beautifully trained musicians and compositions and so forth. So I think Exeter was right for me in one way because I also, there were enough people I could talk to about race, but not necessarily always the kids. It would be teachers like Bedford, or my history teacher, Henry Bragdon, my English teacher. I took a seminar in Faulkner when I was at Exeter because my English teacher, Bennett, whom you wouldn't know, but if you know any young writers, there's a Bennett Fellowship, which is a great writing fellowship available. He says, look, maybe you'd enjoy this because your parents are Southern. Maybe there's something here for you. So I have a kind of blended, eventually I realized I was blending things together. What really worked for me was the freedom to do things. And I obviously wanted to see the world. I mean, I tried twice to go abroad while I was at Exeter. It wasn't good enough to be at Exeter. I wanted to go to France for the summer, and I had figured out a way of doing it. My French teacher said, it would help your French. You start off French in the gifted class with a native-speaking Parisian. It'd be good for you. And then I wanted to go on Crossroads Africa. my senior year, which is sort of a precursor to the Peace Corps. But my mother always said no. But
And Shane read John Irving's comment that all the years he knew you at Exeter, he didn't know about your family and he didn't know much about your background. What about in terms of sharing Exeter with your family? Was that something you could talk about, what you were doing, or?
I talked about it, but not with the enthusiasm that I was actually experienced. And I guess I would use my second brother, Willie, as an example. I was a photographer for the school newspaper. I started freshman year. I was at one point the assistant photographic editor and so forth. But my brother, Willie, had actually taught me a lot about photography as a child. And it showed me how to use light meters and all sorts of things. I never told him, okay, so I get to Exeter. He has a Pentax, which is a Japanese camera. At Exeter, we have a roller card, which is a very famous German camera. We had an American Speed Graphic, and the actual photographic editor had a Hasselblad and a Rolleiflex, which if you've ever seen people on a runway in a show, they're looking down on a double lens camera. This is before digital, shooting fast. So I get to use all these wonderful cameras. I get to learn how to develop pictures and print pictures and so forth. I never shared with Willie. God, it was really great that you gave me that background, because I got picked up as a freshman to do photographs. And before the end of the first semester, I could shoot film and develop stuff and put stuff in the newspapers.
Larry, let me. I think we have time for one more question, and then I think there's some pictures that you're going to discuss. But one other figure in the book that was really sort of a central figure and really a compelling figure is your dad. And I haven't asked you about him. And would you say a bit about your dad and how he fits into the book?
I think my dad would be, the way I would try to summarize is that the meditation part is that in order to finish the story, or to grow up, I had to reimagine my dad, that my dad was not being malicious and just saying, I don't want you to go, and fighting about it, being a little angry. He was basically saying, I would love you, and I want you here. I think you're a very smart kid. That's why I talked to you about John Dewey and George Washington Carver, because you understand, you're interested in this stuff. And his dream was that I was going to go to Wash U, you see, and live at home. And remember, going back to segregation or race, Wash U had voluntarily desegregated. It's a private university and admitted Black undergraduates for the first time, not in their history, but the first time in many, many years. They did when they first opened. But so he saw opportunities for me there. And I guess the beauty of the thing is that I take the story all the way to my Harvard graduation, because it's when I see him and realize that my dad, he's been disabled since I was a sophomore. I've been on my own financially, but I look at him and see this handsome old man struggling to try to keep up with me. And I finally have empathy for him as a human being. And, he's a guy who lost everything. The farm that father had left him, his job at the Farm Security Administration. And, it takes a lot of courage in your 40s to just pick up and move, which is what he did. And the family myth, and I think it's not true, there was education available, public education available through college. Willie, the second son, went the first one to go to high school in St. Louis, ends up at Stowe Teachers College. So it was like, we've got a path. We don't have much money, but there's a path for education here. It'd be like people in New York City, many of the immigrant communities, when City College was there and so forth. It was like that he saw a path for me that didn't mean I had to be separated from him. So, let me just say one more thing about my dad. He's different from my mom. My mom, if I come home from Exeter, gives me a nice little peck on the cheek. My dad, if I come home from Exeter, gives me a sloppy kiss and a bear hug.
Well, he was one of the people in the book I really wish I had known. It was a wonderful portrait, seeing him through your eyes. Let's see, Shane, do you have time?
Do you want me to tell what these pictures are?
Sure.
This is a picture of my dad that was taken when I was in college. It's in the book, probably taken during my freshman year before he had his stroke. This is the picture of my dad the last time I saw him in 1966, just before I boarded a plane to Washington and get married. And you can see he's got a cane, and he's old. This picture is a picture of my mother taken sometime after my father died. It's in the book. She's a very regal person. I think you get a little bit of that from this picture. Oh, this is not in the book, but this was taken by a professional photographer when I was about 4 years old. That brown suit was something my brother Al had made, who was taking lessons to become a tailor. After he got out of the Navy, he had served in the Second World War. My wife calls this the little professor picture. This is a picture of my sister Louise at Forest Park, which is a beautiful Olmsted Park, very near Portland Place, which became famous from one of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations came down Kings Highway, and Portland Place is right there near the park. This is Dad. This is me on the left as you're looking, and Barry on the right. We're mixing cement, and we're helping my father build this barbecue pit with a brick chimney. I like the fact that the shovel is as big as I am. But my dad, when he worked at the post office, would spend his vacation time on projects around the house. And eventually, this is when we were little 50s, but the garage gets painted or whitewashed white, all the windows get fixed. We just kind of worked on this 1906 house all the time. Willie was, most of the pictures taken of me as a child. This is me and Barry at Christmas about 1951, standing next to a Christmas tree. Notice we have the same clothes on, which is something that bothered me more than it bothered Barry, I'm sure. And that's the picture of Willie taken of me by myself that same Christmas. This is my brother Urshel. He's in the chapter Our Wayward Black Sheep. He's a kid who you'll find in the story had trouble fitting into the family, to put it mildly, but very handsome young man. And this is a picture taken after my dad's funeral. All the siblings are there in the back row, are all the boys. My grandmother is down here on the left. You can't see her. My mother, Lena, Leela, and Louise. We're all together. That's at the end of the chapter. Okay. This is a picture when I'm about 11 at Bates School. This is where I went to the Gifted and Talented program. It's taken by my classmate for a Brownie Kodak, which is, I had one of those too. Great. Oh, this is the picture I used for my Exeter application. And this is a picture which appears on the cover of the book. The first semester I'm there at Exeter, studying at my little desk. My wife claims my desk still looks that messy. This is my friend Brink, who I met the first day. We had an encounter, a racial encounter, but we became friends. He's helping me take pictures. That's for you technology buffs. That's the American Speed graphic camera with that 3x5 or 3x5, I think, large negative in it. I think we're shooting cruise shells on the river, or on the river. That's me wrestling, 1961. That appears in the yearbook. It's in Scholarship Boy. Since I mentioned John Irving, that picture also appears in John Irving's little memoir, The Imaginary Girlfriend. That's Ted Seabrook, my wrestling coach. This is also from the yearbook. Very, very important mentor and just an incredible human being. This is not in the book, but I won the Williams Cup, which is a prize that's given to sort of an outstanding senior. That's William Gurdon Saltonstall, the principal. Oh, these are the graduating seniors and some of their dates after graduation. And the young one in the checkered blouse with the white collar is Philip Seabrook, the coach's daughter. Okay. And there's a story about that in the book. And this is a picture just taken me in 1975 when I was still a kid. This is when I went to Cornell. Good. That's it. Thank you. Great.
All right.
Hi.
All right. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, now we're going to move over to the audience Q&A. Just as a reminder, the book is available for sale at left-bank.com. Supporting Left Bank Books is really helpful to keep the event series going. So I guess I want to start with, well, I'll break the ice with a question of mine. So I believe that Cider House Rules was based on John Irving's time spent at Exeter, correct?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
There's an apple orchard right in Exeter, but it's set in Maine. But it's
It's been so many years since I have read that book, but do you think that he may have based a character on you?
I don't think so. I'll tell you why. There were, as far as I could tell, no blacks in Exeter at all, except during the apple picking season in the fall, because there was an orchard. Can't think of the name, but the kid went to Exeter, the day student. I suspect if he based it on anything, he might have based it on if he worked at the apple orchard, which I think he did, on his encounters with the workers there. The only time, it's interesting, I was looking at my yearbook, some of his other books, like The World According to Garp, have some black young men in them. But by the time Johnny was captain in 61, I was 62. By the time I was captain of the wrestling team, there were lots of other people. I was the only black on the varsity, but 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 4 or 5 other black kids in the wrestling room, and there couldn't have been more than a dozen in the whole school. I don't think so. I think his tribute to me is called the half-pound piece of toast, and his when I don't make weight at the big championship tournament in 1961.
I think I might be remembering like segments of other books and like splicing it with Cider House Rules.
Yeah.
Like, wait, did that not take place all within the confines of the school?
No.
Okay, maybe not. Yeah.
Remember,
Right.
Cider House Rules is actually a good family story. It's actually I think that's my favorite novel of his. It's not your typical nuclear family, but how kids get connected is very much the theme of that. And the kids are read Dickens every night, David Copperfield, which I just recently read. During my COVID confinement, I've been reading classics.
And that concludes our book report of the evening. So thank you for helping me cheat. All right. So our first question is from Billiken Racer. So the question, or saying, I'm late in joining this. I was wondering if you speak to young men or other people about the courage, about that courage. So maybe the courage that it took to leave home and venture into the unknown.
I first, maybe I may sound a little self-effacing here, but whenever any parent asks me about Exeter, the first question I ask is not how smart is the kid, get hardworking. I ask the question, do you think this child can grow up away from home? And I think what looks like courage on my part is the fact that I had a lot of people putting a lot of social and emotional capital into me to give me the confidence to not just get on the train, but to cry because I knew I was losing something. And then have the courage to walk up to a kid I'd never seen and say, do you know the way to your station? And he says, I'm going there. Would you like to share a cab? I'm not sure that's courage. I am convinced my parents would never let me get on that train if they did not have confidence I could do it. And I think a lot of that's just my position in the family. I would never push a kid to go to boarding school. That has to be a decision, hopefully, of the child who has some inkling that, where this school, this is not exactly what I want to be. Or my friend Brink's grandson, who lives in Richmond with Exeter, and he said, once he interviewed there, he says, I can finally let my nerdy self come out. That was his response. So the intense work for him is allowing him to be who he is at that young age. There are plenty of very smart kids who would not do well at Exeter, and it's partially because there are a lot of smart, hardworking kids there, and you'll be surprised how many of them are in your classes. And some people just need. I felt like I internalized my family. That's how I had courage. That's called courage. I had all of that support, love, and ability to stand up for myself when there's a racial epithet spoken in front of me. Not get adults involved, just saying, look, we're living together here. These are my boundaries. And I don't think of myself as necessarily courageous. I think my parents raised me, or my brothers and sisters raised me, to see the world as being full of friends I hadn't met yet, which means I'm going to give most people a chance. If it doesn't work out, I've got enough sense to say, okay, you're by yourself right here.
Okay. So speaking about today's kind of world, do you think there are really good opportunities for young Black children to go to schools like Exeter and schools that are kind of away from home that could be a very good opportunity for children to propel them into a career similar to yours?
Well, I wouldn't say just similar to mine, but where they might flourish. There are opportunities. And some kids I've encouraged to try the summer school to see about what they liked going away. Many of these schools have made a lot of effort to try to diversify themselves. But I don't know if I'd say there are lots of opportunities, and I still think the limiting opportunity is you got to grow up away from home. That's a big limitation. I don't care how smart you are. There are a lot of I met some very talented people when I was in Louisville. A young woman the daughter of someone who used to clean our house. brilliant student. She went to the Exeter summer school. She got a scholarship to go there, but she's the oldest in the family, and she just didn't feel comfortable leaving. And I respect that. And she went to a very fine. But this family is almost better than my family. All of these kids had scholarships to the local private schools, collegiate schools, and so she ends up at Bates College, and she knows Chinese. She's been to China. She's had a great life. But I think the real problem with education is that we have not invested in the basic education. Private school is a add-on. It's not for all kids. It's exclusive in the sense that it's not universal. There are just some kids who emotionally are going to go to a place like Exeter or its competitor Andover and goof up. They don't have the discipline, the self-discipline. There are no study halls. You have a free period. It's your responsibility to figure out your schedule that you can't get everything done that night before. You've got to do that. You got sports, you got activities and so forth. But if I could change the world, I would bring some of the Exeter education into public schools. And there have been a few attempts in some places like Chicago to bring the method of, it's almost Socratic teaching in running institutes for other teachers. But it's also a way of building, frankly, a feeder net. There are only 1,000 kids at Exeter. You got to find out where they are. And they're always the kids who want to apply, but they're not necessarily the ones that you need in your school at this particular time. So,
David is asking, did you feel you had the weight of ancestors on you?
I'm hesitating. Yes and no. I say no. There are instances in the book where I'm just going to go on and do my own thing going on. I'm not pledging a fraternity like my brother Earl and Willie and my nephew Cornell and so on. But sometimes I think I realized though that there was some expectations from my older brothers and sisters that I would come back to St. Louis, that I was going to come back and be a great politician or something. And that it was hard for me to realize how disappointed my brother was when I finally told him, no, actually, I don't have any plans right now to come to St. Louis. Wait a minute, I should be fair though. Many of those opportunities were pushed at me when I got out of the Yale Law School. Do you want to come work for the governor of Minnesota? Do you want to come work, do this, do that? And I very much resisted and said, I was the first year I was teaching, I got 2 offers to leave before I even finished my first semester. And I said, no, I really want to do this. I want to give this a try. And so I think I had enough strength to resist it, but I think it's an unfair thing to say to someone, it's your responsibility. I think my responsibility to my ancestors is not to mess up the opportunities that I'm fortunate enough to have. That would be the one thing I said. I don't think I necessarily follow their directions. Why I'm so close to my brother Al is that after he was, heartbroken, he got over it. He just says, okay, so your dad was right. You're never coming back to St. Louis. And that's right, but we're still very close. He's and I'm so close to even my brother Willie before he died and so forth. One thing I noticed about my family is every time we speak, we always end the conversation with "I love you." That's the last message I heard from my oldest sibling, particularly.
So if we have any other questions from the audience, but I will ask one more of my own. Do you think if you hadn't gone to Exeter that you may have stayed in St. Louis? Do you think you would have potentially, like, even if you'd stayed in St. Louis, kind of followed a similar career path?
I think so. I think that the real problem when we talk about institutional racism and things like that is there is a very narrow path that some blacks get in, and that, my parents had college education. That's a competitive advantage. It's not clear that had I gone to, say, Wash U, that I wouldn't have still been the same kind of student I was at Harvard. I mean, there are a lot of very smart teachers there and students there, and I think I was given so much. I had so many skills you needed to succeed academically, particularly as a black male. I was very disciplined. I could pay attention. My brother, photography, learning photography before you're 10 years old, you have to pay attention. Those are very important skill sets that I had before I even went to Exeter. And Exeter was not a disruption of the education I had. It reinforced and built on what I was doing. So I imagine had I stayed, and I wouldn't have gone to Sodan. I was tracked into the track 1A. I would have gone to Beaumont on the north side. That it's more likely I would have kept doing the same kinds of things and possibly won a scholarship to Wash U, or won a scholarship to one of the private schools. There was at least one private school in St. Louis for boys that also desegregated in 1952. I'd like to figure out what happened in 1952, because there were 3 institutions that desegregated voluntarily before Brown, St. Louis School of Pharmacy, all about the same time. So I think if I were writing a novel, my father would be in the argument would say, look, if you can win a scholarship to this fancy school, or all these kids go off to the Ivy Leagues, why couldn't he win a scholarship to Thomas Jefferson or John Burroughs? I don't know if Burroughs did, but if you go out and look at Thomas Jefferson, they have on their website, they admitted their first black student in 1952. And I do know someone who went there because he went to Brown. He's class of 65 at Brown. I'm class of 66 at Harvard. So, I'm very grateful for my Exeter education. I served on the board of trustees. I support it, but I think sometimes things are tracked. It's almost like zip codes. I was in the right black zip code at the right time in the 40s and 50s. And, most of the kids, in that same zip code with the same sort of family values, did similar kinds of things.
Your niece says great interview. Your niece Kim.
As I said, you don't mess with the Palmer tribe.
Yeah, it's been fantastic working with you, setting up this event, and getting to know some Deirdre has been absolutely fantastic. So Deirdre, if you're watching, hi. All right, so one more question. So David is asking, who is the ideal student for Exeter? So
today. Well, the ideal student for Exeter first has to put out of his or her mind that he or she's going to end up at Harvard or Yale or Princeton. Back when I was at Exeter, with only 220 kids in our graduating class, 60 of us went to Harvard, 35 went to Yale, another 12 or so went to Princeton, so forth. I was on the board of Exeter trustees. They have made it very clear at Harvard they do not want that many kids from a New England prep school, even though Exeter is much more diverse than almost any suburban school in the Northeast. Kids from all over the country, all over the world. But that's the first thing. Get that out of your mind, because it sounds unfair, but they'd rather have more kids from Stuyvesant High School than from Exeter, except on transfer. If you want to transfer, you went to Exeter, they're very interested in you. But they don't take that many transfers, so don't get too excited. But I think the student has to have very good work habits. The schedule is long, the day is long. And the student has to have something besides academics that's going to kind of motivate them so that they can meet other kids and meet other adults. And I think academically, there's got to be a certain amount of inner excitement about something. Ornithology, I don't know what it is, but something that you're going to bring to the table, because the education is so intimate, and the other part of the education is residential. Okay, I think my most important intellectual mentor at Exeter, I think, was a history teacher who lived in my dorm. I never had him in class, but the number of things we talked about, what I should study in college, I mean, just all the things you need to have. But the other final one would be, they need good relationships with adults. I mean, good, solid relationships, because, well, particularly when it's an all-boys school, if you have authority problems, you can do some very crazy things to yourself and get yourself into a lot of, you just harm yourself in ways that aren't necessary.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Joel and Larry, for doing this interview, for doing this event with us. It's been a long time coming. Your book is available on our shelves now, so
Great.
so happy to have it there. But I'd rather have it in other people's on other people's shelves, so it's available for sale.
Good.
And really, congratulations, Larry. Thank you, Joel, for doing this interview for us. And thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful book.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you to the audience, too. Thank you all for tuning in. So we will see you next time. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.